Bless.
You just don't walk away after you've killed a man. I don't care for what reason, whether it was a drunken brawl or whether it was for racial means or whatever. You just don't absolutely go and beat a man to death with a baseball bat.
In Detroit, 1982, the murder of Vincent Chin sparked a strong reaction from the Asian American community and led to reforms in civil rights and the justice system. Not only was the murder a hate crime, it was a turning point in Asian American history that would expose bias in the justice system, push for stronger hate crime protections, and unite Asian American communities across the world to fight for change. But to understand how we got here, we have to take you back to the start.
The forge plant at Detroit is the best equipped in the world. 200 hammers and forging machines use 1,800 tons of raw material a day.
In the 1920s, several major automobile companies opened factories in Detroit. This led to Detroit becoming widely known as the car capital of the world and earning itself the nickname Motor City. That was until a new competitor arose. By the 1980s, Japan had taken the title of world leader in the automobile industry from the US because of their smaller, more fuel-efficient cars. This would lead to the Japanese car sales skyrocketing, and the auto industry in Detroit took a big hit. Entire factories were downsized or closed. Thousands lost their jobs. And as fear and frustration grew, some people looked for someone to blame.
Asian Americans. Many of those laid-off workers blamed Asian Americans for their job losses in the auto industry. Now, we need to introduce two pivotal characters in this story. Ronald Evans and his stepson Michael Nitz. On the night of June 19, 1982, both Ronald and Michael went to a bar where they got into a verbal altercation with Vincent Chin, a 27-year-old Chinese immigrant. He was celebrating his bachelor's party 2 days before his wedding at the same bar as Michael and Ronald. During the altercation, Evans and Nitz mistook Vincent Chin and blamed the quote Japanese for the decline in American auto jobs, despite the fact that Chin was Chinese American.
Mr. Nitz had to grab Mr. Vincent Chin in a bear hug while Mr. Evans swung a bat, repeatedly striking Mr. Chin.
Evidently, Mr. Chin broke loose. He ran out here to the middle of the street and he stopped. He slipped. Mr. Evans was standing over him with a baseball bat. He had it with both hands, and he was hitting him in the top of his head.
He swung the bat as if a baseball player was swinging for a home run. Full contact, full swing.
Vincent Chin died 4 days later after his head injuries. Evans and Nitz were initially charged with second-degree murder. They later accepted a plea deal on manslaughter. In March of 1983, Judge Charles Kaufman sentenced them to 3 years of probation and a $3,000 fine, with no prison time. The judge was infamously quoted saying, "These aren't the kind of men you send to jail." This is what Judge Charles Kaufman had to say about his sentencing.
Based upon everything was indicative to me that they attempted to administer a punishment. They did this too severely in careless, reckless disregard of human life, which is what manslaughter is. And that's what they were found guilty of, and that's what I predicated my sentence on. Had it been a brutal murder, of course these fellows would be in jail now.
This light sentence provoked outrage among Asian American communities. That was Lily Chin, Vincent Chin's mother, who was immediately outraged by the light sentencing.
And all I remember is Mike coming over the top of me and pushing the guy off of me. And I remember absolutely nothing else of what happened inside there as far as the fight goes.
The key witness, in my view, was Racine Caldwell, who was one of the dancers, and the jury did agree that her testimony was credible. The feeling, I think, about the other dancers and Vincent Chin's friends as well, is that they were not as credible in general.
Well, Racine Caldwell testified that she had heard me say it's because of you little so-and-sos that were out of work. I guess if you want to construe that as a racial slur, I don't know how you could do that, but I never said that, period.
Here, we can see that Ronald Evans completely denies racial motivations for the murder, but this can be seen as untrue, as many witnesses testified to him saying the racist remarks. And this only further fueled the outrage of the Asian community.
就按判啊，佢呢個法未講法律唔開啊，判啊攞佢入呢個嘢唔對路能夠閃靚位啊，講話判咯，我監到判先啊，我本人都唔係我法題啦，冇得問一句話唔係判我要劇話幾個人都咁樣，我佢係白人咧，我啲小孩紅人佢都係個人都唔呀，我冇理由都唔信我講嗰啲殺人都唔信我到媽媽呀媽媽，幾個唔信臨門我唔信用唔對用我想。
And it wasn't just Lily Chin. Asian Americans nationwide were outraged at the light sentencing. Asian Americans, Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, and other groups for the first time united in a pan-Asian coalition to demand justice and civil rights protections, all thanks to this person here.
Helen Zia, a Chinese American journalist and activist living in Detroit, became one of the most important voices in the fight for justice after Vincent Chin's murder. At the time, very few people, even in Detroit, knew about the case, but Helen Zia helped change that. She realized that if the story stayed quiet, nothing would ever change for Asian Americans facing racism and violence. The tragedy of Vincent Chin was the exigence for Asian Americans to unite and fight for change, especially Zia, as shortly after, she helped form American Citizens for Justice, the first pan-Asian civil rights organization in Michigan, bringing together Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Filipino, and other Asian Americans for a united cause.
They didn't even spend one day in jail. They paid the equivalent of what you'd pay for a used car. That was what they were fined. And I was just outraged. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh, we can be beaten to death like a dog, worse than a dog, with a baseball bat, and the killers will go scot-free. This is like the 1880s.
Through her leadership in the ACJ, Zia helped push the U.S. Department of Justice to take unprecedented action. For the first time in American history, a federal civil rights case was filed on behalf of an Asian American victim. This was a major turning point, proving that attacks motivated by anti-Asian bias were not just personal disputes, but civil rights violations. Between 1984 and 1987, a federal trial in Detroit convicted Evans of violating Chin's civil rights and sentenced him to 25 years in prison, while Nitz was acquitted of all charges. Even with the ultimate acquittal, the federal civil rights trial established crucial legal precedents and inspired lasting reforms in the U.S. justice system. It established that Asian Americans were a protected class under the Civil Rights Act, not just Black Americans. The public outcry and the failure of the initial state trial, where the prosecutors were absent and the victim's family couldn't speak, led to widespread reforms, including mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines to reduce judicial discretion, the establishment and common use of victim impact statements, giving families a voice in sentencing hearings, and the requirement for prosecutors to be present at all court hearings.
Now look, the murder of Vincent Chin wasn't just about two men and one victim. It exposed national issues that millions of Americans could have faced. Anti-Asian racism, economic scapegoating, unequal justice, and gaps in civil rights protections. This all goes to show that the murder of Vincent Chin was something much bigger than the nation thought. And it is important to remember that these changes would have never been possible without Lily Chin, who fought tirelessly after losing her son, and Helen Zia, who transformed the case into a national act of activism. Today, his case matters more than ever. As indicated by the AACJ, anti-Asian hate crimes are still more than double pre-pandemic levels. After his case, the federal government established anti-Asian violence as civil rights violations. Today, that legacy is seen in the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, meant to further protect the civil rights of Asian Americans, which would have never have been possible without the case of Vincent Chin. It is important to remember and recognize that his story shaped a movement and how his legacy continues to live on today. Because the fact is that
Vincent Chin would be alive today if he were not Asian. And there is no question about that in any of our minds.
Do you think the